Hello, Year 12. One of you yesterday private commented me and said, "Sir, I need a bit of help on that work. I'm struggling on how to get my head around it, and you've not really asked us for work like this before, so here's some help." For those of you who have already submitted me work, thank you very much, and I'd like you to reflect on this little explainer I'm going to give to you right now, and go back to your original work and perhaps just annotate it slightly to add a few more improvements. Those of you who have not done the work yet, please use what I'm about to say to give me some good quality work. So here we go. Now it's about an investigation that was done about the riots in 2011. These were inner city riots that happened across the UK in 2011. It kicked off in London first, and then it spread to Manchester. That's Salford. Salford's a poor part of Manchester. Nottingham. Where else have we got? Birmingham and Liverpool. Now, I'm not going to keep saying those names through this explainer. Liverpool? I will just keep referring to London. Okay, now your first question, actually it's not really a question, these are hints, these are suggestions on how you should be thinking when you read a source text. So you've got to have your methods head on, think about all the general concepts, your data collection methods, your sampling methods, ethics, all that jazz. So the first question, one, it's about, well, it's a hint asking you to think, and I will read. Did you consider ways in which the various samples were obtained and how they might affect representativeness? Okay, so what we've got here is sampling technique and how that relates to representativeness. Now, I know you've done a lot of work on representativeness. You know its sister concept is generalizability. You know that if you've got a representative sample, then a representative sample, that's a sample of the target population, is your ideal. Right, let's look at their sampling technique. So we've got a researcher, and they ended up with 270 respondents. I'm going to call them RES and RESP, for unstructured interviews. So this is a classic qual data interpretivist approach. So they are after data that's full of meaning, emotion, and to get that, you know, the researcher is going to have to develop, magic word, verstehen, with the respondent, because the respondent is going to have to trust the researcher. And if we look at the profile of the respondents, you will see why trust in perceived authoritative figures such as researchers will be quite hard to come by, because let's look at the profile of the respondents. Now, as I understood, most of them were black, so that's an ethnic dimension. Most of them male, so that's a gender. Half, is it half students? Half were students, like you. A quarter were unemployed. And the ages third were 10 to 17. That's exactly where you guys are at. Top end of that. And 2/3 were 18 to 25. So we've got a very, very young group. Most of those, okay, all of those are students. Some of those will be students. Many of them will be unemployed. Some of them will have jobs, and because they're at the start of their life, they will be probably low paid, low skill, because that's what happens when you're in your early 20s most of the time. Okay, so that's the profile. Now, timings of the, actually let's just say that. Okay, so yeah, that's our profile. Now, if we consider this, if that's our sample there, can we generalize what these guys are thinking and feeling and wanting to say to the target population if it was all Londoners? Can we take what they think, say, feel, and say that's what all Londoners think, say, and feel? No, we can't. Because many Londoners are, well, for a start, 50% of Londoners are white. Many, I haven't got the figures, are 25 plus. So that's not representative, therefore not generalizable. However, could we generalize these onto, if our target population, target group or target population were of the same social characteristics, then we could generalize. We could generalize. Okay. What else could we say about that? Okay. The researcher. This is quite a hard to reach group, actually, because the people in this group are not inclined to answer lots of boring questions in a big log interview with someone who's perceived to be in a position of power or come from a traditional background as the researcher would. So the researcher, to get access, this is a key word, to the target group, to get a sample of respondents. In this case, and in many cases, as would be the case of you at school, they have to go through a gatekeeper. Now, your gatekeeper will be Miss Enright. These guys' gatekeepers, people who know them, will be youth workers, maybe friends, stuff like that. Indeed, the researcher went directly to some of their friends, and that's significant. Okay, so then the gatekeeper gives them access to the sample. Okay. Right. Now, what problem have we got? If we look at this relationship, what problem have we got with this scenario? Are the respondents going to answer truthfully about how they feel with the riots? Well, perhaps they would to their friends, because the friend has got automatically, if the researcher talks to his friends, automatically they've got verstehen. Another key word I want you to use. And because they've got verstehen, they're going to have trust, empathy, insight. In other words, they're going to understand, see the world through the eyes of the respondent. However, the problem with that is it can lead to a lot of bias, particularly if you think the respondent, let's say it's a 2-hour interview, it's recorded, because of the group they're going to be speaking in restricted code, and remember that from Bernstein in education, in other words slang. That means all of this spoken word needs to be put into text through a process called transcription. In other words, write it down, and then it needs to be, and this is where this fits in, interpreted. And when it gets interpreted, there is room for bias or value pollution. And this may affect the validity of the data. Okay, that's question 1. Question 2 was, the initial interviews were carried out in the first 3 months after the riots. To what extent would the same or other researchers be able to repeat the interviews and obtain the same or similar results? Okay, so we're talking about timing here. Now, let's say, so we did it in July, let's say that's July, that's when the riots happened. Let's say 3 months later, that's November. Now, if you were to do interviews here and interviews here and compare them, what sort of study is that? It's not just one snapshot in time, it's 2. It might go on further. What do we call this? A longitudinal study. Now, it would be very interesting to compare what people think here to what people think there, because we would be able to establish trends, get more insight, more detail. The other thing is, if the researcher A was not able to do the interviews in November, we've got all sorts of problems. Verstehen will be lost. Might the respondents' views will have changed? Another problem, and this is the biggest problem of longitudinal studies, if we've got 270 there, are we going to get 270 here? Probably not, because usually there's massive drop out rate. Okay, so all of these things are going to affect the ability to compare one point in time to the other, so that's reliability. Views are going to change, so there's going to be problems with validity. Also, the interviewer effect is going to come into play, because if there's 2 interviews, the interview effect is going to change. So you could check out a study you might want to bring in here is Lavrov. Do you remember interviewing young black boys in America, and they were very taciturn. They didn't speak very much, but when they sat on the floor with them, they spoke a lot. In the same way, the social characteristics of an interviewer affects the interview. So check out interviewer effect. What else is it going to affect? It's also going to affect what they say. If it's interview B in November, they're going to come out with lots of socially desirable responses. Okay, that's enough for that one. So there's plenty of stuff to think about there. Okay, question 3.